Hi, Stu here with Stu's Whiskey Minute, and today we are talking about age, the age of whiskey and what the age of whiskey means. There's a few things you should know about the age of your whiskey. The first thing is that unlike wine, whiskey doesn't age in the bottle, or it's thought by most people not to age in the bottle. So if you have a 10-year-old whiskey and you wait 20 years, you do not now have a 30-year-old whiskey. You still have a 10-year-old whiskey that is just 30 years old. Unlike wine, which has some live yeast, whiskey's yeast are dead, it's a distilled spirit, so the action in the bottle, while some people say they detect changes, it's not going to be as much or as fundamental as that to wine. So a 10-year-old whiskey is pretty much always a 10-year-old whiskey. But what does that mean? You have a whiskey that says 10 years old on it. What a lot of people don't realize is what that actually means is that the youngest whiskey in that bottle is 10 years old. Most distilleries, when they're making their whiskey, their single malts or their bourbons, they are actually blending different barrels of different ages to get the flavor profile that they want for that whiskey. So a bottle of 10-year-old Laphroaig may well have older whiskey in it, 15, 20, maybe even older than that. But the youngest whiskey in the bottle by law, if it says 10 years old, is a 10-year-old whiskey. Now what if the whiskey doesn't say how old it is on the bottle? You'll see that from time to time. There'll be a whiskey and there'll be no statement of how old it is. Well, you know a few things. If it's a Scotch whiskey and it doesn't say how old it is, it's at least 3 years old. Scotch by law has to be aged 3 years by Scottish law. So if it doesn't say what it is, you know at least it's 3 years old. And usually with Scotch, if they're not telling you how old it is, it's because it's on the young side. Probably has some whiskeys under 10 years old. Because the public tends to turn away from 4, 5, 6-year-old whiskeys, not that they should, but they just do. So you know that with Scotch. What about with American whiskey, bourbon, and rye? Well, if it doesn't say how old those whiskeys are, you know that they're at least 4 years old. Bourbon, rye, and other American whiskeys actually don't have a required amount of period they have to be aged like Scotch. They have to be stored in wood for some time, but it could be 30 minutes theoretically. However, if an American whiskey is less than 4 years old, it has to say the age on it. It has to say how old it is if it's less than 4 years. So if it doesn't say, you know it's at least 4 years old. But you should beware, because sometimes on a young American whiskey, it'll be written in the back of the bottle in very small print that it'll say, okay, age 36 months or age 3 years. They won't put it in a big label in the front. But that's how you know how old your whiskey is. And that's Whiskey Minute for today. Thanks.